Hey, what's going on, traders? It's Johnny here with Trader X. Thank you guys so much for tuning back into the channel. I really hope you guys were all able to enjoy your long weekend and were able to catch up on some rest. But as usual, I want to go ahead and get right into today's recap. And as you guys can tell from the thumbnail, unfortunately today was a pretty big red day for me. So the red streak definitely does continue. Me and my brother haven't really been performing the best the past, month or so, and as you guys know, and so I want to go ahead and explain to you guys exactly the mistakes I felt I made today that, led to me losing a lot of money and, any takeaways I have from it. But as usual, right, let me go ahead and let you guys know exactly how I ended up doing. So I was down about $200 on TQQQs today and about another $45 on SQQQ. Now these were my field orders, right? So you guys can see I didn't even have that many trades today, right? But I still lost a decent amount, and it was all majority on one trade. And I want to go ahead and explain to you guys exactly what my thought process was and where I think I went wrong. And so heading into today, the way I was, looking at the market was, if we take a zoom out, even like the past 20 days of the NASDAQ, right, we can obviously tell that this thing has been bleeding pretty badly, right? It's been selling off pretty aggressively, making these lower highs and lower lows. And heading into today, what I noticed is right around the past 10 days, right, as you guys can tell, the NASDAQ will have a nice sell-off, and then it'll typically try to bounce at around the bottom VWAP, right? It'll find a support somewhere around the bottom VWAP, and so as this thing sold off, right, on the 26th, I believe this was, right, or 28th, right, this thing had a big sell-off, and then it found a support, and it started to trade sideways, right? So once it was able to validate a support, any single time it would approach the bottom VWAP here, right, it would typically tend to bounce right all the way back up to top VWAP. So nothing crazy at all, but the movement itself, right, if you got in from lows to highs, it could be over a 3% move on TQQQ. And so as this thing would sell off, right, it would find a general support area, and then it would trade sideways, right, sell off, find a general support area, trade sideways. And then so as we saw this thing sell off again, right, what I ended up, paying attention to was the chances are, if this thing has been selling off very aggressively, right, the past 10 days, and right around this area, we're no longer selling off as aggressive as we were, right, where this thing would sell off super aggressively, trade sideways, and then continue to sell off, right? It's now starting to trade a bit more sideways, right, where it is forming these lower lows and lower highs, but it's not doing it as aggressive as it did over here, right, on this drop. And so now that we are starting to trade a bit more sideways, heading into today, I was expecting, this thing to sell off, and I was going to try to buy at closer to these bottom VWAP levels where it has tended to bounce, right? And ultimately try to ride this thing back up to the top VWAP. And so as what we ended up seeing happen is, let me zoom in on the 1 day, 1 minute chart. Right, the NASDAQ, right at market open, it actually had a bit of a fall, but then started to shoot up. And that was the first trade I took. Once I saw this thing bounce, right, pretty hard and break above the EMA, I decided to get into TQQQ, but as you guys can tell, this thing got rejected, and I had to stop out, right? So that was the first loss I took. The second loss I took was pretty much doing the same thing, trying to predict when this thing was going to bounce. So as this thing sold off, right, to like right around these areas, I bought in, and then, expecting this thing to start to bounce on the day, but that's not what ended up happening, right? This thing ended up selling off. And so that gave me a better indication that I should probably hold off until it really approaches these previous support levels, right? So that's ultimately what I ended up doing. I started to wait for this thing to really pull back, and once it started to approach right closer to these areas, I knew it had a general area of support right around the 12,000, right about 40 mark. And so I knew that 12,000 itself was a pretty critical level, given the fact that, it's been trying to hold around these levels for the past, few days. And so as this thing was approaching 12,000, we actually ended up seeing a bit of a bounce, right? So it was right over here where I ended up losing majority of my money. So as this thing continued to sell off, right, I got burned twice on it. And so I wanted to be more selective, right, and get in when it was closer to the support area. And so right around here, I saw this thing bounce, and I bought in initially, right? I think right around here I bought in, but this thing continued to sell off. And then once it formed this little bounce here, I got way too excited, right? So I got excited thinking that this was gonna finally be the bottom, and so I averaged up literally at probably the worst spot possible. You know, this thing was clearly getting rejected by the EMA and had a clear direction on the day so far. And given the fact that I was just trying to predict what was gonna happen today, right? That's always what ends up losing me money. I feel like, and what I struggle with the most, it's predicting things. And so as this thing, started to bounce, I was, hoping that it was finally going to be this big reversal. And, ultimately that wasn't the case. I averaged up and this thing ended up getting rejected and stopped me out pretty quickly, right? And so this type of movement, when you're fully averaged in, it can do some damage. So I lost, I believe, over $100 on this trade, believe it or not. And so even after that big of a loss, right, that really dismotivated me, but I wasn't gonna stop trading there because my thought process was if I'm just able to ride one of these trades, right, where this thing, if it were to correct itself and now we're able to get into one of these pushes averaged up, I could make majority of my money back. But that was obviously playing, that was just me being very hopeful today and just expecting this thing to recover. And as you guys can tell, it ultimately ended up recovering, right? So the idea behind what I wanted to do today was there because the Nasdaq has been selling off, and so there was plenty of room for this thing to have a nice reversal on the day and to make money on TQQQ, similar to what happened Friday, right? So you guys don't remember what happened Friday. So what ended up happening was this was the Nasdaq ended up selling off, right? And then it actually ended up correcting itself a bit. So, or it was actually right around this area, right? So, on the first, right, what we ended up seeing was the Nasdaq sold off pretty aggressively, and then it found a support right around the bottom VWAP, right? And then it ended up changing direction. So rather than get rejected by the EMA, it started to trade sideways, broke above it, right, and formed this little higher high here. So as it broke above it, it ultimately pulled on back, tested the EMA, and now that it acted as a support rather than a resistance, it was a pretty good indication that this thing was going to continue to uptrend, right? And so given we were trading, at around the similar levels, obviously it ended up breaking support, right? So I ultimately didn't know if this thing was going to end up tanking all day because of the fact that it just broke the critical 12,000 support area, right? General support area. Once it broke it, this thing bled really fast. And so I personally was thinking that this thing was going to sell off on the day. So that's why I ultimately wasn't looking anymore for a TQQQ play. But as you guys can tell, right, that's ultimately what ended up happening. So this thing ended up finding a support, right? No longer was it getting rejected by the EMA line. So it was doing it, getting rejected aggressively all throughout the morning, right? Started to trade sideways, found a support right around the bottom VWAP. And then as this thing started to trade sideways, it broke above the EMA. And as you guys can tell, it's done it a few times, right? So it wasn't like, oh, this thing broke above the EMA, clear indication it's going to change direction, right? Because it struggled to hold anytime it's broken above the EMA, as you guys can see. But this time what I noticed, or what I should have done a better job, right, and paid more attention to, is now that this thing broke above the EMA, right, now it's actually doing a good job of holding above it. So before, right, around these areas, you guys can tell anytime it broke above it, it would instantly get rejected pretty quickly too. And so as this thing broke above it, right, no longer was it starting to sell off aggressively, it was more holding on the EMA. And then we ended up seeing this nice little run here, right? So this was definitely indicating signs of a direction change, right? Because we were no longer making these lower highs and lower lows and getting rejected by the EMA. Now we were making these higher highs and higher lows and riding the EMA line up. So even if I didn't wait until this play here, right? So even once I saw this thing, make a higher high, start using the EMA as a support now, had a nice push, I could have waited for a pullback and gotten in on this play here. This play alone, right, if I bought it initially and averaged up, right, this alone could have made me about $200, right? If say I were to buy in, with a 25% position size around here, average up as it broke resistance, and ridden this thing up to middle VWAP, right? You guys, got to factor in also that TQQQ is triple leverage. So although this thing is only moving like 0.4%, 0.6%, you got to triple that, and that's how much, you could potentially make on TQQQ. And so that's why I say if you just were patient on the day and waited for this thing to start to change direction and then got in when it made sense, right? You could have made a killing, to be honest, by writing just TQQQ up. And what ultimately ended up happening is this thing finally broke above middle VWAP, and I decided to get into TQQQ, thinking this thing was going to start to recover all the way back up to previous resistance levels of closer to top VWAP, right around 12,200. And the reason why I felt that way too was, if you look at it the past 5 days, the previous time that it got rejected and changed directions, this thing was able to surge all the way back up to top VWAP. So I was seeing a similar pattern here, right, where it had a nice sell-off, and now that it broke above the middle VWAP, I thought we were going to ride it all the way back up to top VWAP, but that's ultimately not what ended up happening, and I ended up getting burned on my last trade here, right? So overall, I would say my ideas and intentions are there, but my execution is horrible, right? So what I mean is, the idea itself of this thing, of having the possibility to sell off and then have a nice recovery the way it did, right? Because from bottom to highs, this thing recovered, almost 6%, which is a really, really, or it could be a really nice, profit and return on that one trade alone if you just wait for it to truly set up and confirm confirmation, right? So I ultimately paid the price today by I wasn't, buying in when it made sense to. I was buying in trying to predict the reversal, right? So I was buying in thinking, oh, this is finally going to be the bounce. This is going to be the bounce, right? So I was being very hopeful today, and that's definitely something that led to me losing a decent amount of money, right? The second thing I could have done better is bought in when direction was in my favor. So I was buying in being hopeful all throughout the morning, and then I ended up missing out on the actual, TQQQ play here when direction was more confident, right? When this thing wasn't getting rejected by the EMA, but was now using it as a support. And as this thing ended up, approaching these more overextended levels and then selling off, right? All of this area here was pretty choppy to me. It was pretty difficult to understand. I had this right idea behind this thing could sell off and have a nice recovery the way it did, on Friday, but that's ultimately not what ended up happening, as you guys know, right? This thing ended up recovering after breaking the previous support level of 12,000, right? It ended up finding a support right around here and reversing itself. And so the main takeaway, I wanted to share with you guys is stop trying to predict reversals when it comes to day trading. Instead, I would just recommend going with the flow of the direction, right? So maybe as you see the Nasdaq selling off aggressively, you could get into the inverse ETF until the direction is there no more, right? So once this thing were to break above and then use the EMA as a support, that's probably a good, indication that you should get out of SQQQ and maybe start to focus on TQQQ. But yeah, so that's definitely ultimately where I think I went wrong today. And so I do have to, be real with myself and just realize that I have been performing pretty bad the past month, right? I would say combined, me and my brother have probably lost about $1,000 or more, if not more, right? And that's just off, 3 weeks, a month of trading. So that's a significant amount of money, and it's getting to the point where I need to ask myself, if things continue to go south this week, I definitely do need to start thinking about potentially scaling back, right? So not using as much money to trade every day, because if the consistency isn't there, there's no point in trading with more money, right? I can be learning these lessons at half the cost, right? Even 20% of the cost by just trading with less money. So I am trading with $10,000 every day, right? And since I'm not performing the best, it really wouldn't be the worst idea to trade with 5,000 only, or 4,000, or even 1,000, or even $100, right? It's just everyone's different, and personally for me, trading with those smaller amount of dollars, it really doesn't get me as attached and emotionally like into the trade, right? Personally, that's just me with like $100. That's why I wasn't really a big fan of, even when I was first practicing trading, just trading with a smaller dollar amount. It just wasn't as rewarding or motivating to me, and I think that's personally okay, right? If anything, it motivated me to get a job, save up more money so that I can trade with more money, and I could really, get the emotional aspect of it. And another thing is just, when it comes to day trading, it just makes it that much like I said, more bearable when you have income coming in, because taking a loss like today really hurts, right? So $240 within, 3 hours, it's definitely a tough pill to swallow, because for the majority of my life, even now, I've been working an hourly job, right? So just seeing that much money being lost, within that amount of time, it can really be dismotivating, and all of that stuff. But at the same time, I just got to remember to keep showing up every day, right? And then just trying to, all I can ask of myself is to continue trying to learn from my mistakes, right? So the minute I stop showing up and I accept defeat, that's really when, I've lost all hope. And although at times like now it can be, super, frustrating that I'm not seeing the results I want and all that stuff, I can just sit on my butt and complain all day, or I can try to do something about it, right? I can try to study up more, observe my trades more, see what trades I've been taking repeatedly that have been losing me money, and maybe I should try to avoid doing those types of setups in the future, right? So it's all about really just trying to, enjoying the process of trying to become profitable, right? So just showing up every day, having fun with it, making sure you're doing stuff that makes sense to you, right? And that's pretty much all we can ask for as traders, right? I do, you know, although it sucks that we have been getting lots of losses on the channel, I really do hope that we've been at least showing you guys that, not everyone's making money. There are definitely traders who are struggling, and it is a battle and it is a grind, but as long as we're showing up every single day, that's really all that matters, right? And yeah, I just want to, provide some motivation for you guys who have been struggling as well. Use this channel as a way to check in every day and just realize that, not every trader out there is killing it. There are plenty of traders that are losing money. And so, yeah, I just hope that me being real with my losses, provides some value to you guys, and, help makes you guys feel a little better about yourselves too, knowing the fact that if I'm, still showing up every day and I keep, you know, being consistently red, there should be no excuse why maybe even you, don't show up every day. But yeah, that's ultimately everything I wanted to talk about today. Sorry I was going on a rant, but I just didn't want to express how I was feeling at the moment. But yeah, that is everything I wanted to talk about in today's recap. I do want to thank you guys again for your time. If you guys are new to the channel, we really do appreciate, you guys dropping a like and subscribing. And if you guys have any questions at all, want me to break down any stock for you, just go ahead and drop a comment and I will do that for you. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to talk about. I will be posting a recap tomorrow, so I will see you guys then. Take care.